Excellent. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Legal Tech Live. I'm Nick Rishwain, your host today, and every time we have an episode, I am your ongoing host. We have, of course, Ivan Rakelin, my co-host and co-founder, with us today. Glad to have
Ivan
you.
Rakelin here.
Glad to have you back for like 2 consecutive episodes.
No, it's great. I think we're getting back into the grind here. I like it.
Yeah. And our guest today is Ron Friedmann. Ron is...
Greetings.
Welcome, Ron. Thank you so much. Ron is with Fireman and Company. He is... Well, let me read a little bit about Ron Friedmann from Prism Legal. Prism Legal is your professional website. It's also where I find your blog, which is, the blog is called something. It's called Strategic Legal Technology. Funny thing is, I learned about that being separate from Prism Legal because I always go to the Prism Legal website to find your blog and didn't even realize there was a separate blog name about it. You've been in the legal project management, legal process outsourcing, business process outsourcing, legal technology, knowledge management, and e-discovery, and you've been doing these things for the last 2 decades or so, correct? Is that?
It's coming on 3, sadly. I started doing practice support, if we use the umbrella category, in 1989 at then Wilmer Cutler.
Okay, all right. And Ron and I had a kind of a fun where we got to interact. I think it was right around the holidays where we were playing around with Periscope, I think it was, and we just I had some free time. It was
Nick was very kind. I'll say Nick helped me understand how to use Twitter and Periscope for doing video interviews, which I subsequently
and it was perfect. It was a dead time of the year, and I was like, hey, yeah, just shoot me. Let's do this next week, and that's how we sort of got to meet face to face to begin with, and that brings us here today. So the Strategic Legal Technology, I should add, the Strategic Legal Technology blog was honored last year, November 2016, on the ABA Journal's Top 100 Blogs issue. And actually, you should have that issue here because our friend Nicole Abood, who is also in the sidebar with us today, was also honored for the Gen Y Lawyer podcast. So that's...
Wait, Nick, I have a question. Are you suggesting you actually have hard copy in your office?
It is rare. It is rare. But when
rarity.
But when my friends make a list, I like to keep it. So
excellent.
So I like to do it, but it is a rarity that I do anything that isn't digital. So
right.
Anyway, that's where we're at today. Ivan, how about a little intro from you? Yeah, I want people to get used to seeing you again and knowing about you again.
Sure, absolutely, Nick. So this is great to have me back on the show for 2 consecutive episodes, I guess. My name is Ivan Rakelin, recovering lawyer, like I think the 3 of us here. Recovering lawyer, diplomat, Green Beret, and turned startup investor and advisor who accidentally ran 50 miles once. I'm actually getting into more into the ultra marathon scene, so I probably won't be putting 1 in front of that or once. So I don't know. I'll probably change it to ultra marathoner. But at the end of the day, I'm passionate about legal tech, technology, social media, and the sorts, and that's why I'm recovering, because it seems as though legal space is definitely one of the conservative industries out there, and that's why I think you have to essentially have 1 foot out of it in order to be able to bring innovation to it. That's me. So Ron, it's good to have you, and let's get into this, Nick.
Ron, tell us a little bit. So you've been a commentator on legal tech for quite some time. How long has the Strategic Legal Technology blog been going now?
I started the blog almost exactly 14 years ago, May of 2013. And originally, I think when I first started, it was on Blogger, which was a then Google service. And not long after, I realized I needed, because I was solo consulting at the time, so I realized I needed a website. And so I, working with a friend's company here in the DC area, had a website built and started having the blog under my own URL. But before that, it was really a sea change, because through the 90s, I would occasionally write articles that would be published in, there's really no other way to get your name in print. It was through various legal trade publications, many of which were owned by American Lawyer Media.
That's right. and still many of them today, although fewer, and there is some elimination.
Less impact.
Yeah, but they still do own quite a few, and they have been merging and eliminating some of them in the recent past. So this was your way to kind of build your own real estate in the legal technology field.
Absolutely, and I have opinions about a lot of topics, so it gave you a way to express those opinions.
I like that, and it was something that you were really honest with me from the very beginning. I have this real interest in the artificial intelligence and robotics. I just think the stuff is fascinating, not just in the legal tech field, but as a whole. Interested to see how these things will progress and affect our lives and our lifestyles and so forth. And when Ron and I chatted, I think back in December, he was real upfront with this. And I thought that was awesome because you were really the first one who said it. Like, I think it's really overstated, and you were very open about artificial intelligence possibly being overstated in its capabilities in the legal field at this time. And nobody else really talks like that. They just want to talk about what it can do and how it's going to do everything. And there is a lot of that. So what do you think? How do you think it's overstated, Ron? How do you think legal AI is overstated?
There are too many articles, the headlines of which are essentially the legal robots have arrived, the robot lawyers have arrived, and lawyers will start losing their jobs. This will change everything. And the way I frame AI, and I know there's people who disagree, I think it's important for lawyers and law firms to keep track of the market, to start running some trials, but I would put it in the same category as other practice technologies, that it will help. But if you look at the actual use cases today, the two most common use cases are e-discovery, and that, depending on what you consider AI, I mean, I could argue that I was doing AI and e-discovery already in 1990 with an advanced semantic search engine, but that may be a scholastic argument. But certainly with predictive coding, computer-assisted review, tech-assisted review, whatever we want to call it, we've been seeing that for at least 10, 15 years. And then the use case that has emerged most recently is contract analytics, both for due diligence reviews and for contract management. And more firms I hear of experiments to try and get a better handle on costs and managing matters. So I think it's very promising, but those are the primary use cases. And there's also their research products. So you have Ross Intel, which is, some of it, it can help write a brief. At least that's the claim. I haven't had a chance to evaluate that. And then you have the third-party tools like Lex Machina, Unravel, and CaseText. There's maybe more data analytics than AI, but I'd put in the same broad category. So that's what I'm seeing, and those are all very valuable, but it's not necessarily revolutionary or disruptive.
So Ron, what would you say is the main friction point to making this space progress further or faster than it currently is based on your perspective?
The economic model of law firms. So even though there's much talk about alternative fees and fixed fees, first of all, it's not as big a percent of the large, and I'm a creature of large law firms. So when I talk, I'm going to talk about large law firms, by which I mean at least, let's say at least 100 lawyers, but a lot of, in my consulting practice, it's often 200-300 lawyers minimum. Mm-hmm. So that's the market I know best. And the consumer market, I will leave to others. The friction point is that even where law firms are operating under fixed fees, the lawyers are often compensated as if they're billing hourly. So the economic incentive is to actually work faster and adopt
be more efficient is not there.
Yes, to be more efficient is not there. And lawyers work by precedent, so there's always the question of, will this really work? I have talked to clients, prospects, and friends at large law firms who, for the contract analytics space, I know some firms that have evaluated 2 or 3 or 4 of the contract analytic products and felt they weren't ready yet. And I know others that say it's really working. So there's always the empirical question of, does it actually save time for a particular practice? And so it's not like you can go out and buy a product and become dramatically more efficient, you at least have to test that proposition, and then is the efficiency overall, or is it for a fairly limited task?
Right, but that's why we don't see innovation coming from larger law firms in the legal tech field. It's coming from outside. I mean, it's a similar model to your Uber. The taxi companies aren't the ones that wanted to innovate to work themselves out of a job, essentially. So I think we're seeing it from external.
Right,
and you're just a comment I wanted to make.
You know, there's some argument. There've been a couple articles, like Bill Henderson just had an article in the ABA Journal about managed legal service providers and their use of technology. So you have companies like Axiom or Elevate or Integrion, or what used to be Pangea 3 and is now Thomson Reuters Legal Managed Services, where they may be investing more in the technology because they have a different economic model in the way they support lawyers, often in-house lawyers.
And there is a lot of excitement, what I'm seeing in legal tech, and now a little bit more, although I've seen it more in the fintech and in other spaces. There is some more investment. I think Casetext just got $12 million in funding or something like that. And are you noticing larger investments from venture capital in legal technology softwares or services?
You and I, Nick, are probably reading the same publications. I don't have, typically I don't have any inside information on those types of investments. There's certainly been transactions, higher dollar transactions in the e-discovery market, but that's more, I would view that more as roll-ups and changes of ownership necessarily than net new inflow. I mean, it may be a net new inflow, but that's a more mature, not fully mature, but a more mature market. So, but there's a surprising number of startups, and I don't have total command of the data, but my sense is there was a peak in 2014 or 2015 in the dollars that Angel List was tracking going to legal tech companies, and it's still high, but maybe it may have peaked. Okay.
So that may be some limitations there, and this, that is one thing that I started looking at it with a little bit more, especially on the AI side. I started looking at it a little bit more critical eye after your mention. I took that to heart and thought, okay, I need to look at this, and discovered much of what you just said, that the tech-assisted review and the predictive coding items were the items that people were kind of throwing as artificial intelligence rather than true machine learning or true natural language processing. And now there may be some of that involved in that, but that seemed to be the items that were really getting the money, or they were growing, and it wasn't necessarily the artificial intelligence or AGI or anything like that you might see in a Westworld episode. It wasn't that type of a thing. Right.
Now, let me just make one other comment, because if we look at, I think, I'm struggling. How do I want to say this? I think that lawyers who are often said to be the most critical thinkers, and I'm using that to mean analytically, but you could also have another meaning, which they are also often very critical, judgmental. But when it comes to AI, it's almost like it's magic to them. And they say, well, look at what's happening with driverless cars, or look at what's happening with AI. This is my iPhone. I have a lot of reflection on it. But if you look at driverless cars, I was just reading an article yesterday. The amount of data being collected is enormous. The amount of investment is enormous. I was shocked. It's like, depending how you count, a car can generate 4 gigabytes of data per second with all the different sensors coming in, with LiDAR, the laser imaging technique, and then regular radar, and then all of the car's sensors. The amount of data for driverless cars just dwarfs anything in the legal market, and the amount of money dwarfs. So of course we're going to see more progress there. And then query, even if we had, do we have that much data in legal, and is there anyone who's going to spend the money to make sense of it?
Yeah, interesting. So where I would like to go, and Ivan, jump in when you want, but I did want to ask, so where do you, I don't want to just hammer the AI sector, because I know there's a lot of other legal tech and that you could cover. What is the most exciting to you and most realistic that you see in the next 2-3 years?
So, and some of this, I may have bias just because of what I do day to day in the consulting practice, but I think we're at a pivot point in some of the more mature technologies. So a lot's been happening for larger law firms in document management and enterprise search. So you've had a shift in market shares. So you've seen iManage, which had multiple ownerships. It went private and now has better control of its own fate. And it's releasing a major new version called Work 10. NetDocuments, which has been around for a while, there's finally been more embrace of its cloud-only model. At the same time, there have been shifts in the enterprise search market, which is key for knowledge management and comparing matters and staffing. And so you had Recommind, which was a leading product for many years and still maybe was acquired by OpenText, and you have Raven stepping in enterprise search, though Raven was just acquired by iManage. You have Handshake as an enterprise search. You have native SharePoint Fast. So there are a lot of moving parts in the infrastructure. A lot of large law firms are migrating document management systems and or enterprise search. And if they do it the right way, I think there's a lot of bang for the buck. But they have to know exactly, they have to have a good plan to get the benefits.
Excellent.
So that's where some of the action is. We're kind of back to stuff that's old because there are new generations of the old.
It's sort of like when we went through the Web 2.0 or Tech 2.0. This is sort of
Right.
LegalTech 2.0.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. And then there's also a resurgence. I was going to say resurgence. That may be too strong a word, but there's renewed interest in collaboration. So I don't know, about five or 6 years ago, a lot of firms were excited about and piloted products like Yammer, and those did not go very far. And now we have Microsoft Teams, Slack, ThreadKM, and ThreadKM is legal specific, integrating with document management. So there's some chance that we'll see lawyers moving somewhat out of email and having more conversations in collaborative software.
Yeah, that would be in much of what Ivan and I, where we met through, and is actually the way you and I met through the social platforms, is many of the people we know encourage community and collaboration these days. So that is actually good to hear that maybe the legal community as well is adjusting to that idea of collaboration or community-based thinking, masterminding type of ideas.
Right. It's still going to be hard to drag many lawyers out of the email, but I think, a combination of those who are a little bit more techie at heart and those who grew up with social media, there's, I think, more interest in those collaboration tools rather than just the asynchronous. Well, I guess those tools are still asynchronous, but the threaded email, which tends to create a lot of management challenges with the volume and the way it threads.
Right. A lot of repetitive discussions that probably other people don't see, obviously, because it's point to point or one to many rather than the whole community seeing the conversation. And then they don't have to ask the same question. They can go to the thread. So I have a question.
And, yeah, go ahead. Shoot.
So who do you think is best positioned currently out of the biggest, I guess, AI or AI-like companies moving forward to be able to pivot and actually cause disruption in the legal tech space? One comes to mind is essentially because Google has so much data, or I'll say an Apple has so much data from our phones, or a Samsung. Which one of those could essentially take their AI modeling and coding in one space and then apply that, overlay it, and pull in the data from the legal tech or legal space to then cause a significant disruption?
Well, I mean, I'm going to start at the opposite end, Ivan, of what you asked, which is you're sort of presuming disruption, and I think that's a separate conversation, right? So even if someone with big bucks went after this,
I should say movement forward.
Okay, moving forward. I will accept movement forward. When you look at it from a business perspective, there's not much evidence that any of those big boys are that interested in it. So Google, I haven't even kept track. I know they have Google Scholar and they have case law. It's not clear, that they've advanced that or they're that interested in the legal market. I mean, we're all creatures of the legal market, but it's not that big a market when it comes right down to it compared to others. And so would it move the needle for a giant company to come into legal? I don't know. You take a look. What's a precedent? I'm a lawyer, so precedent, Microsoft has kind of been in and out of the legal vertical, depending on the year you look at. And And there are a lot of companies now. I mean, you've got big boys in there now playing with the public data. So you've got Relix, which is the former Reed Elsevier LexisNexis. So we'll just call it LexisNexis. You have Thomson Reuters West. You've got Bloomberg among the big players. Then you've got a lot of interesting legal research. Maybe calling them startups is not quite appropriate, but newer companies from Fastcase, Ravel Law, I mentioned Lex Machina, Case Text. I think there are other specialized products around Edgar. So those are the companies that are already tapping and arguably applying AI techniques to the public data. Then the question is, where else will we get data, right? So we know what the public source law is in the United States. It's not obvious there are any hidden troves of that. And then law firms may be able to apply AI on their own data, but then there's all kinds of privilege confidentiality issues. You can't just put that out in the wild. So let me turn around and say, do you think there are untapped sources of legal data that we should be going after? That someone should be going after?
Well, you just mentioned it. A lot of it's behind confidentiality agreements. So that's probably the most valuable of data that's out there that's not currently out there for public consumption.
Right. Do you guys think there would be any way of generalizing that data, removing the items that were confidential or hidden, and still using the data as subsets of data, or is that impossible to remove those? If you're removing names and dates and any identifiable information, is that even possible?
I don't know. I think the question above that is, what would motivate why would a law firm want to do it? Given that there's clearly, I mean, I'm not the one to first point out the risks, right? That's what the lawyers do. But it's like, okay, I have all this client confidential privileged information. So why do I want to take a chance with that? And then what's my economic incentive to do so? So I don't see law firms doing it. I have heard it argued, and I haven't given this point a lot of thought, but if you think about who owns the work product and the privilege issues, is there any issue? I mean, there's an interesting argument, this is the law school in me, is there any issue with a law firm taking any AI tool, choose your pick, and using it across all of its documents to reach any conclusions? There's, some clients could conceivably object to that. I mean, if that's the case, then you have to wonder what's the value of a large law firm, but it's a potential issue.
Okay. What is, in your mind, going forward, what will be the technology that improves access to justice for the public? Is there any particular technology in the legal tech field that, or even beyond that, that it may actually, because we constantly hear that the cost is prohibitive, hiring a lawyer is prohibitive cost-wise for large swaths of the U.S. public. What might improve that? Have you covered that very much?
I haven't. I have peripheral vision on what's often called A to J, access to justice. I don't have deep expertise in it because, again, I mean, the large law firms certainly help with their pro bono programs, but I'm not tending to work with legal services. So some examples are, if you look at what's happened in Illinois through the Illinois State Bar and IIT Kent College of Law, which created the A to J authoring platform. So if you have easier platforms to create expertise systems, or Neotologic, which I believe has licensed at favorable terms to legal service organizations to create more self-service approaches. I think the idea of chatbots, meaning systems you can converse with, whether by typing or talking, is very promising. I think there's some bit of overstatement in the potential value of chatbots because there has to be AI behind the scenes driving it. So like for me to go and talk to my phone, and I won't say the magic words because otherwise my phone might start talking over us. But if I say, draft me a will, right? It's, that's not just a single command. There has to be a whole interview process, and one can program that, but it's complicated. So I don't know that there's a magic answer, right? I wish I could see a quick solution, but there's so many discrete legal problems that are driven by different sets of data. Even people, and even for simple needs, people often want their hands held, and so it's the emotional component as well. So I don't have a good answer. What's your answer?
I don't know that I have one. I ask you for your expertise. I don't think that I have an answer yet. I would like to see technologies making. We interviewed somebody out of the UK called Lawbot, and they were trying to assist people in answering questions of when they may need legal assistance, because sometimes people don't know that. So I don't know that I have a good answer for this. We also interviewed LawDroid, who has a pretty cool idea for helping a small business to incorporate in the state of California. But, you know, that's identifying just one aspect. So you would need, at present, you'd need dozens of chatbots to identify so many different issues to address.
No, I think I'm actually a fan of chatbots, and obviously they're in their infancy at this point. But I think you can, I mean, just like with any algorithm out there, with new data, you're always refining it. So right now you could probably get it to a 90% solution to cover, say, for example, a will. 90% of cases could be covered based on, say, maybe 100 or 200 sets of variables that you need to ask and interview the individual with the chatbot. But if there's a case of first impression, obviously it's a case of first impression. And I guess you could come out with a percentage conclusion of what you should expect from that based on all the other sets of data in there. But you never know until, you know, I don't know if a human or later on in the future, if an actual robot will make the determination based on a set of variables, what should be the conclusion based on those set of facts. But
you know, even if that works, I mean, you then have to start saying, how would that apply if someone's in an abusive family, if they have a landlord-tenant dispute, right? Because there's still the processes, and the courts are even further behind. But even if they, you know, it's so far into the future where everything would be automated, and you can have you sort of automatically put together your filing, automatically submit it. Can you eliminate the judge? I mean, the wheels of justice turn very slowly. So
I think so. That is our main friction point. It sounds like.
I think to answer your question that you posed, that I wasn't really thinking, what is the answer? I guess one of the answers I'd like to see in the access to justice would be more tools like the one we're using right now that makes it easier for parties to go to court without having to travel, easier for parties and their lawyers to not adding travel time costs, not bring the, as you know, during the day I work for a legal tech company that concentrates on marketing expert witnesses. I'd like the expert witness to be able to testify from their office rather than traveling across the country and adding $20,000 or $30,000 in fees for that time. Those items like that, just some simplistic items in civil, certainly in civil litigation, you have issues with. What I've seen so far is there's some issues in the criminal justice system as to whether or not you are able to actually cross-examine a witness against you when they're on video, which I think you can, but you're supposed to be able to meet them present. You're supposed to be able to do that essentially face-to-face. I think this would count as that, but that's me wanting it to be that way rather than me having the empirical data to support that or the precedent.
Right.
But I'd like to see these types of tools used to further access to justice.
Right. I mean,
I will have to second that, Nick. And then as we move into virtual reality and body suits, we can actually replicate that experience.
Yeah.
Both parties are wearing the body suit. So then you can feel like you're shaking someone's hand or hugging them.
That will be fun stuff. I'm looking at the very entry level. Let's try and make it more efficient and cost effective.
Based on today's
right. I mean, we haven't had very good adoption of video, Ivan, to Nick's point. So the virtual reality is very promising. You know, the impact of virtual reality, and this is something I think people overlook. I'll use this as a jumping off point to say, it may short-term, to the extent virtual reality takes off, it will probably create more legal issues about copyright and liability. It will keep lawyers busy with legal issues, it's not obvious it's going to change law practice management or access to justice. And right now, that equipment, I mean, there are enough people who don't have means and don't really have a proper smartphone. The idea that they will then have augmented reality, virtual reality headsets, that we're not going to see that anytime soon.
My feeling, based on what I've read, is that when we see, now this again, you talked about your bias from your day job, essentially. This may be from my day job, but I think that we'll most likely see the use of AR and VR and mixed reality and things like that coming in as court presentations to begin with. I think we might see more of that, accident reconstruction using AR, VR, those types of things. That, I think, we'll see that before we see the actual court system itself changing, because I think that's what really needs to be advanced. And so I don't know that the courts will be using it. I think the attorneys and the clients may be pushing to see some of these things, get a better idea of how something took place through the use of it as a trial presentation.
But it's not coming soon enough.
He says as he adds his spectacles.
Are those the Snap spectacles?
They are, yeah.
Are you the oldest person alive owning them?
I think so.
He's got me by like a year. So
hey! I do have. I think of all my friends my age, I'm one of the few. I do have Snapchat. I'm Ron Friedmann on Snapchat.
Yeah, he is on Snapchat. You are. And there's plenty of us middle-agers in Snapchat. We're not alone over there. Nicole Boot asks.
I like to say I'm a millennial stuck in a 41-year-old man's body.
Oh, you have.
Okay.
You got me by that many years, Ivan. You got me by almost 3 years. I thought we were only like a year apart.
I can still outrun you.
You can certainly outrun me. You can certainly. I'll be on a motorbike next to you. Nicole asks in the side chat, when she said when she spoke to you a while back, I think for the Gen Y Lawyer podcast, she said you seemed a bit skeptical of disruption in the legal field.
Similar to this interview.
Yeah, it which is good. I mean, there's because a lot of people want it. A lot of us are for it and pushing it, but we need to be somewhat. I like having the alternate view. So who do you think, according as from Nicole, who do you think will be leading the change in the law, if not big law? And they're really not, they don't have much of an incentive to change.
They don't. So just to frame this, the point I've often made is the legal markets survived a major crisis. So the economy goes to hell in a handbasket in 2008. Large law firms fire large numbers of people, lay off in 2009 to 2010. The legal market for new lawyers goes to excuse my language, goes poorly.
Goes to Shazam.
Goes to Shazam. And so if that didn't just fundamentally change the market, then you have to look at what are the underlying economic forces that might do that. So I do think large law firms are changing. I have clients that are trying to change, and but the challenge I see, and this is seconded by the Altman-Weil Law Firms in Transition survey that just came out, which is, again, it does survey some smaller firms. It's more of a large law firm creature. It's like the managing partners get the need to change, but the average partner's willingness, either ability to understand that need or willingness to change, is pretty low. So I think you're seeing changes on the edge from some of the large law firms. You have firms like Seyfarth that have invested heavily in the Office of Project Management, although what does it do to the narrative that they just had a layoff of 40 people? You have firms like Littler and Ogletree, which have gone pretty digital in labor and employment, but those have been the value players for a while. And if you monitor them, if you go and hear their CKOs speak at ILTA or other venues, which I do, they're continuing to invest to become more digital and more efficient. And Jackson Lewis just joined them. They just announced a suite of online products. But I view those as, not to minimize it, but I view those as evolutionary. And then you have companies like Axiom and Elevate and Integrion, the managed legal service providers, the LPOs, But anyone who's going to come forward and say, well, there's going to be this massive change, you have to make a case of, well, where is it going to come from? And you can't just say, well, look at driverless cars or look what's happening at retail, because you can, retail is being decimated because we overbuilt, well, I say we, the economy overbuilt retail. The shift to online has happened faster than many expected. Where are the equivalent trends in legal that would force some big change?
It's an excellent point. Now, I know that Susskind writes in his Tomorrow's Lawyer book that they are hearing, and I've heard this from actually one of our previous guests and a couple of big law lawyers who've used my day job service at experts.com, that they are being pushed to do more for less. And and we have seen quite a few mergers in big law and things like that. So there is something happening.
There's definitely pressure. No question.
There's definitely pressure, but I think Nicole mentions she likes your idea is more evolution being greater than disruption. This may be a push. There may be the pressure to push into a certain direction, and that's maybe allowing them to evolve. And Susskind seems to think that those who are really the major players in big law, they may not have to change. It's really going to be those who are a little further down from the AmLaw 50 or AmLaw 100 that are going to really have to make some adjustments.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you the 30-second view, and that is, I think if you look at the AmLaw 200, you've got some that have incredible brand names, either just for being, sort of like the Sullivan and Cromwells, Davis Polk's, Cravath. At that end, you've got the value players, labor and employment, you've got some boutiques, but there are a bunch of firms in the middle that don't have that stellar reputation, that don't have the value reputation, that aren't particularly well known for any practices, and then you wonder, what are they going to do? And some of them are going to survive because the clients aren't as demanding as they say they are. Their bark is worse than their bite. And there's not as much switching behavior as you might expect given all the complaints we hear.
So I have one last question.
Sure.
We're approaching the 40-minute.
Yeah, we're getting to about 40 minutes, so we can wrap it up.
So, I mean, obviously you're a blogger and you do a lot of research and reading. What would you say are the top 3 blogs or sources of information about legal tech that you use religiously?
I have literally over 100 feeds in my RSS. I use Feedly, and I have over 100 feeds, some of which are inactive, and I'm too lazy to clean it up. For legal tech, I look. Sadly, I'm somewhat underwhelmed by the U.S. publications. So there's Legal IT Insider from the UK, known as the Orange Rag, and then you have Legal IT Today, published out of Holland. And I do read Law Tech News, but the line they've drawn, sort of between editorial and advertising is pretty fuzzy to me. So I'm challenged by them.
Those are your bottom 3? No.
Well, those are the ones I'm going to look at for just raw legal technology news. I'm going to look to people who are more of the analysts for what does it mean. And there are a lot of folks out there who, Jordan Furlong, Adam Smith, Bruce McEwen. I mean, they're not writing about legal technology, but they're looking at the big trends pushing the legal market. And I think it's important to understand that.
Yeah, and I've been very pleased with some of the publications out of the UK. I do enjoy Richard Tremont's Artificial Lawyer blog.
Yes, I should cite that one too. Yes, yeah. He's covering that very well now.
He does a very good job with that. Certainly, our former guest, Chrissy Lightfoot, I love. She's not as active blogging these days, but when one of hers comes out, those are great, and she was just a blast to have on. But one of the things kind of go with your skepticism or your about the evolution versus disruption. I don't know if you know Michael Lee, the geek attorney from Morrison Lee, and he's got the Pirated Thoughts blog. He was also in the ABA Journal, and I saw one of his tweets yesterday. He said that appears to be from a customer who was in his office. Know-it-all says, "I had a consult with LegalZoom, so So Michael's comment was, well, a fire hydrant just gave me a physical. I am sure the advice is equally reliable.
Right. Although it's all relative. I just have to say I had my own estate work redone. I had to help my parents. I lost a parent recently, so I had to work on that. And, just dealing with the family lawyer, who is actually someone I know from high school, disagreements on basic phrasing. So the human is not necessarily always perfect either. Let's just remember what the gold standard is.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on that. The human is we're flawed animals. I
don't know. Nick comes close.
I have to be honest. You're right. You're right. I come pretty close, Ivan. But there is, they're flawed, and we've all known plenty of, even not practicing. I've known plenty of stupid lawyers. I don't feel like that's a stretch to say that.
I like that transition. You looked at me when you said that.
On a regular basis, I get the email saying, and this is through my day job, I get the email saying, do you have such and such an expert witness? To which I have to reply, did you happen to search our website? So that still gives me great trepidation as to how far we're going to get in the legal, because I answer that question once a week. When they're asking for they're not looking for a cryogenicist here. This is a pretty standard request, Did you happen to
slow down with the polysyllabics there?
I mean,
getting a little too.
Look, I mean, if you're, I don't practice law, but as a business person, I'm regularly reviewing contracts, and it's just appalling to me. I just reviewed for a friend the other day a contract, and parts of it I knew what they were trying to say, but it was just so poorly crafted. And there was like a key clause that it had to do with kind of a reward for helping find investment. And it used a term of art that I looked on the web, there are 3 hits, all of which are false. I have no idea. I mean, this is a key term and it's not defined in the contract. And I'm thinking like, who's drafting these things?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Scary. With that, we're going to wrap up today. We want to thank our guest, Ron Friedmann. You can find Ron, I'm going to say where I found Ron initially, other than reading certain articles that I hadn't even, before I knew you, I didn't know that they were, I wasn't looking at the byline, but you can find Ron where I found him, at Ron Friedmann on Twitter, and that's Friedmann, Friedmann.
And no punctuation, it's just Ron and Friedmann, no space, underscore, dots, etc.
That's correct. And make sure there's 2 N's on that. Where else can people find you, Ron?
Snapchat, he mentioned earlier.
Snapchat, Ron Friedmann, one word. You can find me at firemanco.com, which is my day job as consulting. And you can find my professional writing and blog at prismlegal1word.com.
Excellent. And there is not a separate website for the Strategic Legal Technology blog, is there?
No, it's the Strategic Legal Technology blog is prismlegal.com/blog.
Excellent. Ron,
hopefully Google has ranked me high enough that you can find it that way.
Yes. Or you can also find it linked on his Twitter profile, which is where, although you are in my Feedly as well, Ron.
Well, thank you.
So I don't always have to go to the Twitter anymore, but there was a day where I'd go there for my updates. So with that, again, Nick Rishwain here with our guest, Ron Friedmann, and my co-host, Ivan
Raiklin. This was a pleasure. I took a lot of notes, Ron. I learned quite a bit this
thanks so much,
right. Well, thank you. It's been a fun conversation.
We really appreciate having you on. We hope when something really exciting, if you're putting out a book or you've got some new sort of, something you want to share, just reach out and say, hey, I'd like to come on and talk about this, or give us some big update if we have some fancy evolutions.
Will do. All right. I will do so.
Excellent. Thanks very much, everybody.
Everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.